Call me weird, but I've always wanted to have a sword fight on the roof of Notre Dame. And honestly, who wouldn't? Something about being up there amongst the ancient gargoyles, sword flashing, the stars shining over Paris. There's something very high adventure about that. And I wanted to find a way to bring it to life. So in this episode, I will be designing a cathedral encounter and using one of the more underrated D&D 5e monsters, something which doesn't have a lot going for it, but I think can really add to the ambience of a specific adventure. So, hello adventurers, my name is Ryan, welcome back to the Red Quills to the Really Quick Maps series, and today on the Really Quick Map series, I will be really quickly mapping a cathedral called the Hautnoir Cathedral, and I will be using as my enemy gargoyles. Now what I'm going to do is over the course of this episode, as I talk about this encounter and how we're going to use gargoyles and the tactics that we're going to use and the lore and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to be sketching out this cathedral. And yes, I am referring to some floor plans of Notre Dame itself, and while this isn't a comprehensive floor plan of the cathedral in its entirety, I do want to use it as an arena in which we can fight a lot of gargoyles, which give them the opportunity to use some of their powers, and I will create a scenario to make it all make sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to get out this A4 sheet of paper. I'm going to get out my series of pens. Most of them are various thicknesses of black pen and a red pen as well. You can find the list of materials in the description below. And I'm going to start by titling it and drawing out the floor plan. Now what I did for this episode is I actually worked backwards because I wanted to find a way to use gargoyles because I quite like them as a monster, but also because I feel like they're undervalued and they're an elemental creature that you can expose your players to fairly early on that aren't really difficult unless they're in a specific environment. I wanted to talk about them as in a way that actually used some of the traits that they have, the ability to blend in as part of masonry, their ability to fly, their resistance to most kinds of damage, and I wanted to create a scenario that actually used that. So today's video is as much about gargoyles as it is about talking about how to use a stat block as the rubric for an adventure, creating an environment that works for them, as we do practically every week on the Really Quick Maps series. And so the scenario that I'm making here is still in the world of Undermont. Now, if you're not familiar with the work that I'm doing with Undermont, you can watch the original video above. And what I'm doing over the course of the next 6 weeks is every week I come out with 2 videos. One of them is in the Game Master Map series, and one of them is in the Really Quick Map series. And what it means is that while all the maps are disparate, and they all have different topics or different enemies or different arenas or different locations, they will all be within the same world, and they will all have a part within this sort of wider plot. And the plot that I'm going with is technology versus magic, old versus new. And that's a scenario I wanted to explore here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a plot hook for the players. Let's set the scene in Hautnoir, one of the largest cities in the world. The players have heard tell of a smuggling ring bringing ancient artifacts from the new world back to the old. Under normal conditions, these artifacts are heavily monitored and licenses are required to bring them in, but private collectors will pay top dollar for smugglers to bring in magical artifacts with properties hitherto untested into the old world. The presence of magic in what has been, up until recently, a technology-fueled society has driven inventors and investors and patrons absolutely wild with possibilities. But the side effects of using magic are not fully studied, and their dangers are all too clear. And so when the players hear tell that the gargoyles on the facade of Hautnoir Cathedral are coming to life and preying upon passers-by, they decide to investigate. Having been assigned to protect the priesthood who work within the cathedral, they find that only one is still living. And in attempting to remove him safely from the cathedral, they find that the storage rooms of the old building are filled with crates and crates of smuggled magical goods. The ambient energy leaching off them is transfiguring the statues on the exterior of the cathedral into living predatory beings. willing to face trial for his crimes, the priest, who has been collecting money from the smuggling on the side in order to repair the cathedral, traps the players within the building, setting fire to some of the offerings on his way out to confuse them in the dark in the hopes that the gargoyles would take care of them. And that is how we're going to lay the scene for this encounter. A cathedral itself, like Notre Dame, isn't a really complex building. There's several different rooms in it and a lot of different parts, and it is enormous. Don't get me wrong, and the architecture is beautiful, but it's not a chamber by chamber kind of dungeon. It's an arena, is what it is. It's this huge open space with a couple of alcoves on either side and a few really interesting tidbits here and there. So what I'm creating here is less of a dungeon and more of a one-off battle royale. Gargoyles against players in an environment which clearly favors the elemental. All of the lead up in the finding out about the smuggling of the artifacts and the priest closing them in and the pedestrians being taken off the streets by the gargoyles, all of that is just the flavoring to bring them into this one encounter. Because with the doors shut and barricaded, the gargoyles becoming aware and more powerful the longer the magic is kept within the walls of the cathedral, our players are faced with a challenge of removing the gargoyles and destroying the magical artifacts before more of them come to life. Because the longer they wait, the more the other gargoyles will animate as well. Now, gargoyles are actually not a super interesting stat block, I will say. I like what they can do. They have a good elemental armor. They've got some good hit points. They can fly, which is odd for something made of stone, but we can use it here. The most useful parts of a gargoyle are the false appearance, which means that it is indistinguishable from an inanimate statue while it remains motionless, and its resistances and immunities. It has its own lore within D&D, which is that they are actually from the elemental plane of Earth, and I'm changing it from this scenario, but those abilities and traits that it has are things that we can use. So for instance, I have outlined 5 tactics that you can put into place which either benefit or hurt the gargoyles. And the first is their ambush tactics. Using that false appearance ability while it remains motionless, it is indistinguishable from an inanimate statue. This cathedral is filled with statues. Many of them are actual gargoyles. And so all we need to do here in order to make them that much more of a threat in an enormous building is to have some of the statues already broken. Because if at any point it can detach itself from the players and get a certain distance away, settle itself into a dark alcove where one of the other gargoyles would normally have been, it is indistinguishable from the others. And the players will have to piece together which of the statues is the gargoyle based on whether or not there's a ruined one nearby, figuring out the trajectory of the falling rocks or the statues. They'll have to look at other clues rather than just immediately picking it out in the darkness. Because the other thing is that, of course, it has dark vision of 60 feet and it can fly 60 feet. So if this cathedral is 300 feet from end to end or more, and it's pitch black because of a lack of any of the priesthood or worshippers on the interior, then they'll be very easily capable of detaching themselves from the party and heading up into a dark corner. Another thing that I mentioned is that the priest sets fire to the offerings on the way out, and that's because I want to use the fumes and the smoke. Gargoyles are not only resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks that aren't made with adamantine weapons, they are immune to poison and to being poisoned. And so if we've got this acrid smoke welling up from the offerings, filling the area with this cloud of gases, which can impose the poison condition if you fail a constitution save, that is something that will put the players at a distinct disadvantage but won't affect the gargoyle at all. When we're designing an encounter like this, we always have to ask ourselves, what are the advantages of this stat block inherently? And how can we use that to disadvantage the players and make tactical use of the stat block? Because the other part of that is its weaknesses. Obviously, it is resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical attacks that aren't made with adamantine weapons. Magical weapons are going to be difficult to come by in Andamond unless there are some within the magical weapon, unless there are some stored within the magical artifacts that are inside the church. But what we can do instead is have reliquaries within the cathedral, statues or busts of ancient heroes, of saints or warriors of yore who hold or display their armor and weaponry. in particular weapons made of adamantine, the very thing that they would need in order to destroy the gargoyles. And so now we place 2 more tactical points within the cathedral. The first, which is the poison, disadvantages the players. The second, the adamantine, is an advantage to the players. We've got that balance going in. They're going to have to think tactically about this. Then we come in and start using the environment itself. We've used the ambush tactic, which specifically responds to one of the traits that the gargoyle has. We're going to use one that talks about the traits that the cathedral naturally has, which is that it is known for its sound. All cathedrals are known for their sound, whether it is the bells above, the organs, the choirs. Music is a huge part of that culture, and I want to use it here. So the 2 towers, the north and south tower on the cathedral, have the bells within them, which are just crashingly loud if they're set off. And in addition, there is an organ on the second level that the players can use to send out this wave of sound. Now, technically speaking, there is no disadvantage that the gargoyle has to sound. So what I would do is I would flavor it so that the bells and the organs sound, that inherent ability that cathedrals have, can be used in the battle as well. So that suddenly ringing the bells or playing on the organ, no matter how badly, unleashes this wall of noise, which for those who are unprepared or have not blocked their ears, will force a constitution save or become stunned until the end of their next turn. Once again, that is something that will disadvantage the gargoyles and give an advantage to the players if they think of using it. And so the last one is an advantage to the gargoyles, and it's honestly more of a note than anything else. That this arena works really well for gargoyles and any swooping creature. It's a large enclosed area, massive floor space, the ability to hide behind a lot of different pillars, a lot of dark areas to hide in, and so swooping attacks, grappling players, picking them up and then dropping them, is the kind of attack that a gargoyle will use here. Picking up huge stones and dropping them on the players, toppling columns, sending chairs or benches at them. All of these are environmental attacks that the gargoyles can make based on their interaction with the cathedral itself. They are all things that I would recommend. Whenever you're designing an encounter like this, always consider how the environment can be used to make the battle more interesting. Gargoyles are not particularly clever. They're quite stupid. They're mostly animalistic in their disposition, but that doesn't mean that they can't still do things that are creative. They have a moderately high wisdom stat, which means that they're going to be able to determine whether or not they're threatened or in danger, or whether or not their ideas are going to be a wise choice. They can't assemble weaponry, but figuring out that they have an advantage in the air is certainly not beyond them. And so this encounter, with the dual objective of destroying the magical artifacts, or at least getting them away from the cathedral, as well as removing the threat of the gargoyles and stopping them from multiplying, will keep your players really interested in an environment which is so idiosyncratic and evocative and usable in combat, for combat, in a way that is exciting and fun. And so that is the Battle of Hautnoir Cathedral, and that is the way that I would use gargoyles. Let me know what you think in the comments below. This map, as well as my notes on the fight and more lore of Andamond, is available on the Red Quills Patreon. You can check it out through the links in the description below. Let me know what you think of this encounter. I haven't really designed a church encounter so far, and I can do more if you're interested in that. I just wanted to really showcase gargoyles because I think they're really, really fun. So thank you for joining me for this episode of Really Quick Maps. I look forward to seeing you for the next. But until then, happy mapping. Hello? Call me weird, but I've always wanted to have a sword fight on the roof of Notre Dame. Hello, adventurers, and welcome back to the Red Quills. My name is Ryan.